Most car companies are obsessed with growth, more factories, more dealerships, more customers, more sales. But somewhere in northern Italy, inside a company that technically manufactures automobiles, executives discovered something far more profitable than transportation, something far more powerful than speed, horsepower, or engineering. They discovered that the less they sold, the more valuable they became. Today, Ferrari is worth more than many global automotive giants that produce millions of vehicles every year. Investors treat it less like a car company and more like a luxury empire. Its profit margins rival some of the most elite fashion houses in the world, and despite producing only a tiny fraction of the cars made by mass market manufacturers, Ferrari has built something almost no industrial company has ever achieved: desire without accessibility. Because Ferrari no longer sells transportation, in many ways, it barely sells cars at all. What it really sells is controlled social elevation, and once you understand how Ferrari engineered that system, you begin to realize the company was never competing with automakers in the first place. It was competing with human psychology. For most brands, demand is a problem to solve. If customers want more products, the company expands production. The logic seems obvious. More buyers should mean more supply. But Ferrari operates on the exact opposite philosophy. The company intentionally limits production, rejects potential buyers, and creates artificial scarcity on a global scale. Not because it has to, but because scarcity itself became the product. This is what makes Ferrari so dangerous from a business perspective. It turned refusal into a luxury experience, and that completely changed the economics of status. Most people assume luxury is about high prices. It isn't. Truly elite luxury has never been about expense alone, because expensive things can still become common, and the moment something becomes common, it loses its ability to signal superiority. That is the real currency Ferrari protects. Not engineering, not performance, not heritage. Exclusivity, because exclusivity creates social distance, and social distance creates status. A Lamborghini parked outside a restaurant might attract attention. A Ferrari suggests something more calculated. It implies access, relationships, approval, entry into a system that most people cannot penetrate even if they have money. That distinction matters enormously. In fact, one of the strangest realities in modern luxury is that having enough money to buy a Ferrari often still isn't enough to buy certain Ferraris. Imagine walking into a dealership prepared to spend several $1,000,000, only to discover the company does not consider you worthy of ownership. Not because of your wealth, but because you lack history with the brand. You haven't earned the right model yet. For ordinary industries, this would sound insane. For Ferrari, it became one of the greatest marketing strategies ever created, because rejection increases desire. Psychologists have understood this for decades. Human beings consistently assign greater value to things that appear scarce, restricted, or socially difficult to obtain. The harder access becomes, the more emotionally charged the object feels. Ferrari industrialized this principle at a global level: limited allocations, waiting lists, invitation-only models, relationship-based purchasing, quiet blacklists for undesirable owners, even resale restrictions for ultra-exclusive vehicles. The company carefully controls not only who buys the product, but who is seen owning it. And this is where Ferrari stopped behaving like an automaker and started operating more like a private members club. The car itself became secondary. Ownership became the real product, because when wealthy individuals purchase luxury goods, they are rarely buying utility anymore. Nobody needs a 200-mile-per-hour road car to commute through traffic. At extreme wealth levels, consumption becomes symbolic rather than functional. Products become social language, and Ferrari understands that language better than almost any company alive. A Ferrari signals that the owner possesses not only wealth, but recognized wealth, legitimate wealth, established wealth. It communicates that someone has crossed an invisible threshold where they are no longer merely rich, but socially validated by elite institutions. That may sound irrational, but luxury economics has always been irrational. In fact, rationality is often the enemy of luxury. If consumers behaved rationally, diamond markets would collapse, Swiss watch empires would disappear, multi-million-dollar handbags would not exist. Entire industries rely on emotional asymmetry between objective value and perceived status value. Ferrari mastered that asymmetry, and the company did it by understanding something most businesses never fully grasp. People do not want abundance when they are buying status. They want separation. The average luxury consumer does not dream about owning what everyone else owns. They dream about escaping the category of everyone else. Ferrari sells that escape. The irony is that the cars themselves are extraordinary. The engineering is real, the racing history is real, the performance is real, but those qualities alone cannot explain Ferrari's economic dominance because many manufacturers produce incredible supercars. Some are faster, some are more technologically advanced, some are objectively rarer, yet Ferrari remains culturally superior because status is not created by specifications, it is created by narrative, and Ferrari's narrative was built with almost frightening precision. The company understood early that prestige depends on restraint, mass exposure destroys mystique, overproduction weakens symbolic power, visibility must be carefully balanced against rarity. This is why Ferrari's production strategy appears almost irrational to traditional business analysts. Most companies dream about capturing larger market share. Ferrari protects smaller market share intentionally. At one point, Enzo Ferrari himself reportedly summarized the philosophy with brutal simplicity. Ferrari would always produce one less car than the market demanded. That sentence quietly explains the entire empire, because once a brand becomes too available, it stops functioning as elite social currency. Look at what happened to many luxury labels over the last 2 decades. As they scaled aggressively, exclusivity eroded, logos became overexposed, products flooded social media, accessibility increased, revenue grew temporarily, but prestige weakened. Ferrari watched this happen and moved in the opposite direction. Instead of maximizing short-term sales, the company optimized for long-term desire, and desire is far more profitable, especially when financial markets become involved, because Ferrari's business model created something investors absolutely love: pricing power without volume dependency. Most automakers survive on scale. Their margins are thin, their factories are massive. Their profitability depends on moving enormous inventory through global supply chains. It is a brutal, capital-intensive business, vulnerable to recessions, competition, labor costs, and shifting consumer demand. Ferrari escaped that trap almost entirely. The company produces relatively few vehicles, charges extraordinary premiums, and maintains operating margins that many industrial manufacturers could never dream of achieving. In some years, Ferrari has generated margins closer to luxury fashion conglomerates than automotive companies. That changes everything. Suddenly, Ferrari is not valued like Detroit. It is valued like Paris. And this is where the story becomes even more interesting, because Ferrari's transformation reflects something much larger happening across the global economy. Increasingly, the most powerful companies are no longer selling products. They are selling identity architectures. The physical object matters less than the symbolic ecosystem surrounding it. Apple does this, Hermes does this, Rolex does this. Ferrari perfected it. The company sells membership into a psychological category that wealthy consumers desperately want access to: culturally recognized elite status. And unlike ordinary luxury, Ferrari status cannot simply be purchased instantly. It must often be accumulated through history with the brand, previous ownership, dealer relationships, participation in Ferrari culture itself. This creates something incredibly powerful: aspirational progression. Customers do not merely buy one Ferrari. They begin climbing an invisible ladder. First comes entry-level ownership, then rarer models, then invitation-only allocations, then collector access, then private events, then direct factory relationships. The customer slowly becomes absorbed into a prestige hierarchy designed entirely by the company. This is not automotive retail anymore. It is social engineering. And perhaps the most fascinating part is that Ferrari achieves all this while making customers believe they are the ones pursuing freedom. In reality, the brand dictates almost every variable: which models matter, which colors hold prestige, which configurations become desirable, which owners receive future opportunities, which collectors gain insider access. Ferrari controls scarcity so aggressively that it can shape secondary market behavior years into the future. A limited model announcement can instantly reshape valuation dynamics across collector communities worldwide. That level of influence is extraordinary, especially for a company selling machines. But again, Ferrari is not really selling machines anymore. The company is monetizing aspiration itself, and aspiration is one of the most renewable resources in modern capitalism, because no matter how wealthy society becomes, status anxiety never disappears. In fact, it often intensifies. As luxury becomes more visible online, affluent consumers become increasingly desperate to distinguish themselves from performative wealth. That created the perfect environment for Ferrari. The ultra-rich no longer want products that merely look expensive. They want products that prove selectivity, products that imply insider status invisible to the average observer. Anyone can recognize a flashy car, but only certain people understand why a specific Ferrari matters. That subtlety is critical. Real elite signaling often becomes quieter as wealth increases. The goal shifts away from attention and toward coded recognition among other high-status individuals. Ferrari operates beautifully inside that psychology, and this is why the company's greatest threat has never been another automaker. The real threat is dilution. The moment Ferrari becomes too common, too accessible, too visible, the illusion weakens. The psychological architecture begins collapsing. Prestige depends on tension between visibility and scarcity. Enough exposure to generate desire, enough restriction to maintain distance. Ferrari has spent decades managing that balance almost obsessively, because once exclusivity dies, luxury becomes retail, and retail is ordinary. What makes this entire story unsettling is how much it reveals about modern human behavior. Ferrari's empire exposes an uncomfortable truth about status-driven societies. People often desire social meaning more than material utility. The object becomes emotional shorthand for identity, hierarchy, and belonging. A Ferrari is never just a car. It is evidence. Evidence that someone succeeded. Evidence that someone entered a rare category. Evidence that society recognizes their position. And the company understands this so deeply that it no longer needs to compete on transportation logic at all. That battle ended years ago. Today, Ferrari operates in a completely different dimension where scarcity generates prestige. Prestige generates obsession. Obsession generates pricing power, and pricing power reinforces exclusivity all over again. A self-sustaining luxury loop, and perhaps that is the most brilliant part of Ferrari's strategy. The company convinced the world that owning less access creates more value, not despite the restriction, because of it, which means Ferrari may have quietly discovered one of the most profitable truths in modern capitalism. The richest consumers are not paying for products anymore. They are paying for distance from everyone else.